hide in the forest and surprise them from the flank. Go, go, go!
Warning. Incoming surprise attack. We are placing a flamer tower to protect the core.
They've ignited the forest! We're gonna burn!
X-Morph Defense has quite the attention-grabbing introduction that keeps coming back to me whenever I think about it. It reminds me of something like the scene from Independence Day when the aliens arrive, but as much of a tone-setter as the opening cinematic is, it's the beginning of the first level that locks it in. You have this large metallic spike that just strikes into the earth, obliterating everything around it, a news helicopter with a squadron of police cars and emergency vehicles pull up, and the first thing the game teaches you is top-down shooter controls as you obliterate everyone around it. Then you learn how to place towers. Oh, by the way, this is a tower defense game. Well, as it describes on its game page, X-Morph is a hybrid top-down shooter and tower defense, but at its heart, it's a tower defense game, and it's certainly a unique one. In the multiple drafts I've made for a script talking about this game, I've really struggled to figure out how to approach X-Morph, but only after taking way too long from uploading like literally anything by this point. I just need to bite the bullet and just talk about it. So if I had to describe X-Morph Defense, it would be a 2010 sci-fi disaster blockbuster. It is a spectacle with some unique elements to itself. It's wonderfully over the top at points, and while corny, it's still charming. But it ultimately has the same issues as its counterparts, making it kind of average. But the biggest standout for X-Morph is truly from the outset. Its gameplay gimmicks, obviously, but arguably for me, just the sheer level of design and destruction. The attention to detail put into the utter destruction that can be caused by the landscape, like burning forests or craters in the ground or just debris coming off of objects. You can literally destroy a building to the point of seeing inside of the damn thing. Everything is built to be demolished, and it's glorious, including the fact just everything explodes. The satisfaction of seeing things turn into a fireball from your fighter or your towers, or just dropping a building on the damn thing, makes everything feel so impactful and vibrant in the carnage. Even though the X-Morph themselves strike me as generic and don't really grab much attention from me, the destruction they leave in their wake certainly does. Although it's kind of a shame because they are conceptually interesting as beings of living metal, or at least a sentient robotic intelligence, their designs are just too unremarkable for my taste, especially in contrast to their human opponents, but I'm gonna have to, unfortunately, save them for later, though trust me, it's worth it. But even though the X-Morph are kinda bland, the environments they inhabit and their effect on them aren't, including the soundscape. Everything sounds as it should, with just a little extra weight to it. But the standout for me is honestly the soundtrack for the game itself, because even if the plot of aliens invading Earth is somewhat overplayed, and you've probably seen it a dozen times before, the instrumentation and composition add so much to the experience that honestly, it does a better job at pulling the weight of the concept better than the X-Morph themselves. I mean, you have the orchestral tracks that are mixed in with varied synthetic sounds and beats, setting the tone perfectly for a conflict between alien forces corrupting and overtaking the landscape around it. The boss theme itself being a perfect encapsulation of this clash within the game, with a persistent and unrelenting choir of horns, strings, and drums that refuse to relent in dramatic flourishes, bursting outward as the synthetic chords of the X-Morph permeate the very soundscape itself. It's just so well done. Just hats off to the soundtrack. It does a fantastic job and just helps tremendously in adding intensity to the grandeur and tension of events within the game itself as you play. It is 100% its strongest attribute. As for the game itself, well, it's a tower defense with a bit of top-down shooter. I'm explaining this really badly. In the tradition of tower defense, wow, that's so smart, me. In the tradition of tower defense, you place down towers sometimes in specific spots or in acceptable spaces to fend off units going down a path. In the case of X-Morph, the path generally leads towards the X-Morph core, which, if it takes enough damage, you lose the game. As you progress, more units in numbers and variety spawn, along with more routes opening up for your opponents to take, which requires building more towers, and onward it goes until you either complete all the waves or lose. In addition to regular units along the path, psychopaths who are very capable of shooting you down. You also have air units that fly around in squads, whose overall purpose is to harass you and prevent you from just sitting in top-down mode and just obliterating everything below you. This, of course, places a burden on you as the player to organize your towers appropriately, because even as you unlock new towers, upgrading them merely just changes its specialty, becoming more versatile in dealing with certain units. Unless we're talking about the busted Shockwave Tower to his expelled from high school vandalism cousin, known as the Flamethrower Tower. Just all the towers in one form or another are merely the counter to a certain kind of unit, making their usage heavily dependent on strategy. Which brings us into the biggest component of X-Morph's gameplay, being able to shape the routes themselves. Laser defenses can be made between towers within range of one another, in turn meaning that most of the time, the path enemies have to take needs to change. You can even do it with big enough buildings or destroying bridges. I mean, you can't wall off the core into a playpen. There needs to be at least one path to the core that enemies can take, but control of where that path is and where it goes is functionally where a lot of the strategy comes into play. What gives the game its identity and how you play it, what towers you use, how you organize them, and the developing of confidence you need to play the top-down shooter part of the game will make or break your actual strategy, which in turn leads us to the actual antagonists of the game, the Earth Defense Force.
This is General Margaret Larson, Commanding Chief of Staff of the remaining Earth Defense Force.
They're literally called that? I had only learned that recently. The entirety of the human military-industrial complex is geared towards one thing: making your life hell. They are armed to the teeth and over the top, slapping guns on anything, and if they can't, they'll just make it bigger so they can. They got money to burn, and with the world at stake, plenty of people are more than willing to try any wonder weapon that might save Earth, no matter how absurd. This in turn not only leads to different types of units getting either more numerous or stronger to highlight specific towers you should be using to deal with them, but also you wind up with unique units like infantry that can sneak under or even jump over laser fences, or artillery that can destroy your towers, or the entirety of air routes from attack helicopters and bombers which you can't control the paths of. The EDF is aggressive, numerous, and is always pushing harder and harder into getting towards the space you need to defend by being bigger and bolder and more experimental, leading to a level of jaw-dropping insanity that just makes their units truly stand out, while also tying into a nitpick of mine, which is the game's sense of scale. For example, how big is this tank? A normal tank is pretty big, but it's not like that big. It's on par, give or take, to the size of a pickup truck or a van, although it can depend on the tank. Yeah, this tank takes up 2 lanes on a road and is nearly as long as a freight truck. And that's just like the baseline tank. They only get bigger. Once the game starts throwing in even bigger units, the size of everything just gets completely out of hand. Some of these designs are rivaling the proposed P-1000. You know, the functionally impossible tank designed by the same group of coked-up lunatics who are trying to win the Second World War by finding the magic stick that stabbed Jesus. It's just so hard to appreciate this madness when it's so difficult to comprehend the scale where everything is operating on. You can still tell when stuff is big, but is this boss bigger than a building, or is the building just too small? Oh yeah, there's also bosses. Wait, hold on. The boss battles aren't that complicated. They are designed around the similar principle of making the usage of top-down mechanics essential to even beat. The ebb and flow of organizing towers and coming in with the top-down shooter mechanics of the X-Morph fighter to make up for slip-ups or support your defenses in dealing with specific enemy units, or the massive bosses in-game, makes the game stand out and function. It is part of its soul. Both the scale of the conflict as well as its mechanics of approaching it makes these moments exciting and fun, and when you're engaging with all the mechanics in play, it makes your choices matter and gives X-Morph its identity and ultimately its biggest draw. But it's not quite enough, because just what makes this mishmash of top-down shooter, bullet hell, and tower defense work is that, you know, as previously mentioned, you're using all of the mechanics in play. But unfortunately, whether it be the difficulty or the map or the choice of towers or just all of the above, the game can get into territory where you're not really doing anything. Certainly later levels will test your mettle, like Nigeria, where it gives you the ultimate challenge of defending the core with this map. But it's this level in its brutal brilliance that also underlines another problem with X-Morph. Because after this level, you will learn the true utility of the Fibonacci sequence, and you will never ever escape it. Like, you might have difficulty with a given level with complicated paths you can't easily deal with, and you can just easily resolve that by just lumping your towers together by the core like a conch shell, because nothing really stops you from just doing that. Like, the game can still be fun and challenging, but without cranking up the difficulty to at least hard, you're gonna be walking through it all a bit too easily. If it gets too tricky, maybe bump it down, but I can't stress enough the integral mechanics that make X-Morph a fun game to play. It really requires you pushing yourself to the limit and testing yourself to really get everything out of it, which leads into what else there is to get out of it, because aside from the main campaign, and there's a bit of the main campaign, there's a survival mode, which I think you can guess what that's about. With DLCs, aside from the 6 soundtrack and some extra survival levels, there are 2 DLC campaigns, European Assault and Last Bastion, each taking place in between the events of the main campaign at separate times. The main game has about like 20 missions, and now we're gonna get an entire campaign? And two entire campaigns? Oh, this is gonna be great, what's new? 3 missions for European Assault and 4 missions for Last Bastion. No new towers, by the way. Yeah, it's not great. It's not great. Okay, while it's still interesting and it's ultimately more X-Morph, that is kind of the underlying problem. I'd encourage getting them with the complete edition on a sale, but don't buy them full price separately. It's not worth it otherwise. Except for that sick soundtrack. I can't stress it enough. Oh my god. I would still overall recommend giving X-Morph a try if you're interested in anything I've mentioned. It's a fun experience, even if it's not the most out there thing. I honestly just figured I needed to push myself and just make it clear I could make a fucking video. And hey, I did it. Yay me. Remember this, future self. You can make stuff. And so can you. Person watching, probably, maybe, I don't know. I appreciate you watching either way. Hopefully there will be another video soon. Thanks.